Welcome to the Freeborn Podcast. This is a little midweek podcast. This Saturday at 9 a.m., we're going to have Adam Newman with us, but I've been trying to do some of these in the middle of the week. I know before we hadn't been doing them on video, we've been doing them just on audio, but now we have a little bit of a new little studio set up here with cameras that are attached to the walls instead of putting them on tripods that have to be set up every time. So hopefully make it a little easier for me to get in here and talk about some things with you that are going on midweek. Every now and then maybe I'll get someone else in here so you don't have to just listen to me. But mainly this is just for me to be able to reach out to you, especially those of you of Freeborn Church. Those are the ones that I'm most concerned with speaking to and having a chance to discuss what's going on and maybe hopefully encourage you. I know, according to Terry, I'm not really good at encouragement. So I hope none of you run out and try to slit your wrists after I'm done encouraging you at the end of these. I know I haven't done a lot of them lately because this quarantine, frankly, has been quite the bust for me. It's kind of like Y2K. I mean, it was all hyped up. I was all excited. I know some of you don't like being locked in your house, but man, I was so excited. I had my supply of cinnamon gum bought and beef jerky, and I thought I was going to get to sit in my office and write and program and just be left alone and not have to deal with construction sites or superintendents or anybody well, they were promising 2 weeks, and I knew that wasn't going to be. And then, they were saying to the end of May, and it was looking better and better for me. I was getting so happy. And it just got ripped away from me. And I have not had not one day of quarantine since this all started. I just feel ripped off. I don't know who hates me, but I did not get no quarantine for me. And look, I'm not trying to make light of anyone who actually got the disease and is sick or who is going stir crazy in their house. But I was designed for these things because I never want to leave my house. I would be a hermit if I could, which I don't understand how in the world I got into being a pastor with the type of attitude I have about life and people. But, as I've said often, God has an amazing sense of humor. I've pointed this out before, but if you just look at the apostles and who they were and what they did, it's interesting, very humorous, because you'll have you have the apostle John and James, who are the sons of thunder. They want to call down fire from heaven and burn everyone up who is not on their side, and God and Jesus gives John the task of writing the epistle of love, which just had to irk him something fierce. And then you get Matthew, who's a publican, and he gets to write the gospel of the kingdom. And then you have Paul, who's a Pharisee, and Jesus sends him off to the Gentiles. It seems like none of them are doing what they were skilled to do. You would think that Paul would be the one staying in Jerusalem because he's the Jew of Jews. Surely he'd be the right one to convince all the Jews. And you'd have somebody whose bona fides not so great, like Matthew or even Peter. Let them go off to the Gentiles. I mean, Paul even reprimanded Peter and said that Peter didn't really live as a Jew in his life. And so you would think, that he would be someone you send off to the Gentiles. He'll fit right in. But no, that's not how God sets things up. And I don't think it's just out of sense of humor, even though I can't help but think he amuses himself quite well. But I don't think it's just out of a sense of humor. I think that we often don't really understand what our abilities are and what our qualifications are. We think we do. We think we know what we would be best at. We think we know where our life would be best and what we should be doing. And I think often we're wrong about that. I don't think that God puts us out of our element just for the sake of it, just to prove some point. I know some people think that he does it just to prove that it's him that does the work and not ourselves. But in that case, he wouldn't use us at all, or any skill we have at all, or any talent we could learn after that at all. I don't think that's the right way of thinking about it. I think that we're just not really good at knowing who we are. And that's whenever if you do any research into this or any reading on this, you'll realize that there's a barrier between what is in your mind and what you're able to know is in your mind. And we think we know ourselves very well. And yet that really isn't the case. And if you analyze it for a second, you'll realize that's not the case. I mean, we lie to ourselves so much and so easily because we can deceive ourselves so quickly and so easily. So that should tell you how that we ourselves know that we're not all that we don't know that much about ourselves. And so Jesus sends us and has us do things that are out of our comfort zone because he knows us perfectly. And he wants the best for us. And he wants us to be in a position where we can utilize our gifts and our abilities and our skills, our real skills, to the utmost of our ability and to be extraordinarily successful at it. God wants you to be extraordinarily successful. Now, that doesn't mean he wants you to have a bank account that's full of money. I know that's how prosperity gospel people tend to paint that picture, but that's not what I'm saying. God wants you to be extraordinarily successful, and if you're not successful in your life, meaning if you're not effective and if you're not productive and if you're not making more than you're consuming, then there's a strong likelihood that you are not doing what God wants you to do. And so you should be opening yourself, making yourself vulnerable and accessible to God's will. God's will be not what is hardest for you to do or what's out of your comfort zone, even though his will might be out of your comfort zone, but it won't be for the sake of that. It'll be for the sake of pushing you to where you need to be wildly successful as a person, as a citizen, but especially as a Christian. And if you will, make yourself vulnerable to God. Open yourself up and not be thinking you have to protect yourself from his will. As if he is going to put you in a position that is unlivable or untenable. But realize that he wants your life to be better than you want your life to be better, which is, that's hard to accept for a lot of people, and that's what faith is. I mean, when God tells Abraham, go out into the wilderness and I'm going to make your life better, it didn't seem like that was going to happen, and it didn't seem that was the case, and Abraham went through a lot of hardship, and yet before any time at all, you turn around and Abraham's life is substantially better by every way you can measure it practically. Practically, by every way you can measure it, his life, although didn't come easily, got substantially better. And God wants to make your life better. And that probably includes finances. And that probably includes worldly things as well. Although I can't guarantee that, because that is very low on the system of values that God has. It's not out of the scope of value. It's there. Monetary success certainly matters to a degree. It's just to a much smaller degree than other successes matter to God. And so the money success tends to follow other things, to come after them many times. And so, but anyways, he would have you to be successful. And I know that there are some of you that are really hurting during this time. And so I don't want you to think that I'm taking it too lightly when I joke about me not getting any quarantine time, even though I am a little bummed about that because there's a lot of things I wanted to do with the church and with reading and with writing and doing these videos that I just have had no time to do. I've been working every single day, all day, out of town, everywhere, and so I just had so little time. Now, I am not ungrateful about that because I understand that this quarantine is likely to result in a horrible economic position for the world. And the thing about the job I'm in construction is it always is on the bottom of the trickle. So when the economy is bad and then it starts taking off, construction doesn't take off immediately along with everything else. It takes time to make budgets. It takes time to draw up plans. It takes time to break ground. And then the stuff I do is the very last thing possible in the building, allegedly. And so, if they started a building today, it would be a year or 2 years, sometimes 3 years from the time that I bid a job to when I actually do my work in that building, if they break ground today. And so what that also means is right now there's tons of work. I have piles and piles of work, but I'm pretty sure that all of this work is going to run out along with the rest of the economy, and then I'm going to have a lot of time of the 7 lean years are coming for me is what I'm saying. And so I'm not ungrateful about this. I'm going to have my quarantine is just going to come in about a year. And then I'm going to get my chance to quarantine all by myself, and everyone else is going to be out having a grand old time. And that's usually how it works out with construction. Anyways, I hope that those of you that are quarantining and really don't have much work and aren't going out anywhere and the things you like to do aren't available, I hope you're all doing okay, especially those of you of Freeborn Church. I hope you're healthy and you're mentally healthy, and I hope you're taking advantage of this time, if you have this time, to do things that matter. One of the things that I've noticed, and I was talking with Danny Dalros after the last podcast, is that you would think that when we have all this time on our hands, we would finally get around to doing the things that we always meant to do, whether it be fixing up your house or whether it be spending time in study or whether it be preparing a sermon or whether it be whatever it is you've had on your to-do list for a very long time. You'd think, well, now's the time when that's going to get done. And like I joked on Facebook when this all started, that when this is over, I'm expecting to hear the greatest sermons ever preached, since everyone's had months and months, or weeks and weeks, of time to prepare sermons. Then you think, well, surely they will, all these pastors and preachers who have been whining about not having enough time to really do a good job at it, they're going to have all the time in the world to sit around and do this. And so we should be hearing the greatest sermons ever heard. And what I have found in my own ministry, in my own life, is it doesn't work out that way. I actually do better when I'm busier. When I'm busier at work, I do better at managing my time and getting in enough time to prepare sermons that I think are, acceptable or above average. And that's what I'm shooting for. I'm shooting for my sermons to be what I would consider to be above average. Obviously, I would love for them to be fantastic or great, but I don't know. I'm not sure I have the gift for that, but I do the very best I can, and I find I do the best work I can do when I'm very busy doing many other things. And when I have a whole week off and I can just sit around and read all day and write all day, which I love to do. I love to write. And so I write when I'm off of work. I try to write 2 or 3 or 4 pages of writing a day. And I have time to do that. I find that it's almost harder for me to do. Now, I've gotten better as I've gotten older to be more disciplined and not waste that time and waste it reading Drudge or waste it reading Facebook posts or whatever's out there to be done. That's just really a complete waste of time. And I found that I do a lot better when I'm very busy. But if you're not busy during this time, then you need to discipline yourself. You need to set yourself up a schedule where you're actually doing some things that matter. Reading some books that matter. Writing some, you all ought to try writing. I know I'm not saying you're going to write a book or write a novel or anything you write is going to be read by anyone else, but writing is a really good way to think. It's a really good way to work out things that you need to think about. I've often said, and people have found it humorous, that when you think you're thinking, you're not really thinking. And to a large extent, that's true. And this isn't something that I came up with. This is something I've learned from listening to prominent psychologists that talk about these things. And they've convinced me, and I've noticed it as I've paid attention to it, that it's certainly true that when you're just sitting around and you're trying to think and you're just sitting there and you're trying to think, you're not actually thinking like you would like to be. And it's because thinking is such a strenuous activity. It is such a hard thing to do. It consumes an incredible amount of your energy, of your calories. So your brain consumes, when your brain is actually working at full speed, when it's really thinking, it consumes more calories per let's say per square inch than any other organ in your body or muscle or anything else in your body. Your brain consumes tremendous amount. I read recently that when chess players, of competition level chess players, are playing a competition match, their heart rate is at the same speed as a marathon runner. So that tells you how much oxygen is needed in their brain at that point that their heart is pumping that hard and that fast. And that's because thinking is so resource intensive. And so your brain looks for every way possible to not think that hard, which is why we have a memory. It's why memory exists, as a way to not have to think about everything. Imagine what your life would be. And some of you probably don't have to really try very hard to imagine this. But imagine what your life would be if you had no memory, where everything you had to do, you had to figure it out each time as if it were the first time. You'd be exhausted. Every time you wanted to tie your shoes, you'd have to figure it out as if you'd never done it before. Every time you wanted to get something from the refrigerator, you'd have to figure out what the refrigerator was, how to open it, how to get the jar of juice out, how to open the juice, what's in the juice, how much do you drink of the juice. I mean, every single thing of those, you'd have to recalculate this. Well, it would be exhausting. And so you store all this in your memory. All of this gets stored in your memory. And then you can just act upon that without thinking about it. And so we do all these things without thinking. This is why once you've driven to work for several years, you can drive to work practically in your sleep. And some people actually drive to work practically asleep because they don't have to think about it. Their mind they're doing things out of rote, out of routine. And so they don't have to think. It's why you can get really good at a job, to where you can then focus all your energy that you were using when you started thinking about every single step of the job and how to do it. And once you're good at it, you can do it without thinking about it. And then you can focus all of that energy into the actual physical part, the mechanics of the job, and get really, really good at that. And so that's how our brain works. It looks always looks for a shortcut around thinking, which is why we make assumptions. It's why we make assumptions about the world. It's why we make assumptions about people. It's why we make assumptions about everything, because that is the lazy man's thought process. Now, I'm not trying to besmirch assumptions per se, even though really they're often wrong, but they're so much easier than actually thinking something through. If you actually have to think something through, well, that's just a whole lot more difficult. So our brain, well, it short circuits that, that's not the right word. It takes shortcuts around any thinking. And so if we want to actually think, we have to find ways to discipline our brain, our minds, to actually think and not trick us into believing that we're thinking when we're really not, which is what an assumption is. See, people who make assumptions about life, make assumptions about politics, make assumptions about religion, make assumptions about Christianity, make assumptions about the Bible, they don't think they're making assumptions. They think they're drawing conclusions. They think they're deducing something. They think they're thinking it through and coming to logical conclusions. And you can know that you're not when those logical conclusions turn out to be fraught with problems, which is why you should apply the scientific method to your thinking, and that means that you should be looking to prove yourself wrong, not prove yourself right. So instead of asking yourself, how am I right about this? You should be asking yourself, how am I wrong about this? Because if you can figure out very easily how you're wrong about something you, quote unquote, were thinking about, you probably weren't even thinking. You were just jumping to an assumption, jumping to a conclusion without actually thinking. And so you need to force yourself to think. So how can you force yourself to actually think? How can you know you're actually thinking and you're not being tricked by your own mind to believe you're thinking? Well, you have to find some discipline that forces you to do so. And writing is one of the few, or only one maybe, that I know of. I don't know of any better way to force your mind to think than to sit down and write an argument for what you want to think about. And that's why writing really is thinking. Now, there actually is another way to do that. That I can think of, and that is talking to somebody who will challenge you, which is one reason why I really like doing this podcast. Well, not talking to you in the camera, because none of you, first off, I don't know that anyone's even listening to me. And if anyone is listening to me, there's no good way for you to challenge me. You could write in on the live stream chat. You could write in on that and challenge me there, but you're limited by how many characters you can type. You're limited to how often you can do it, and I could just simply ignore you, and so it's not much of a challenge. But when I sit across this table from somebody and have a chat with them, and the reason many of the people I invite onto this podcast is because I think that they might challenge me. And I want them to tell me, no, I don't agree with you. You're wrong on that. In fact, they're free. Nobody, whenever I invite people on this podcast, I don't give them a set topic that they have to speak on. In fact, it's interesting. They often ask me for a topic. They often ask me what I want them to talk about. And I always tell them, look, I want you to talk about whatever you want. If you want to come on this podcast and tell me how I'm wrong on all the things that I've said and all the things I believe and whatever it is I've been teaching in my ministry or whatever it is I say about politics, I am open to that. Now, I don't want to get into a fight with anybody, and I'm not looking for a nasty confrontation. I want it to be pleasant. I want us to have a conversation, and I'm not going to sit here and nod my head and go, oh, thank you very much, and let you pummel me either. I'm going to push back also, because I'm not only looking for somebody to push back to the things I say, but I'm going to push back on the things they say, and I want to tell them where I think they might be wrong. And so we have that interaction. And that's one thing you need to realize, that when you're listening to a podcast like this, or you're listening to somebody speak, and even preaching is this way too, especially in our circles. typical evangelical preaching is this way as well. And you need to always weigh preaching in this way. So what is the, and this is what I mean by that. When you hear somebody preaching extemporaneously, which means they don't have a manuscript that they wrote out and they're reading from, right? The way a politician does, the way a more mainstream denominational pastor will do. They'll actually write out the whole sermon and they'll read it or memorize it and speak it and look like they're speaking extemporaneously, but they're really not. Especially those that preach the same sermon 2, 3, or 4 times on a given day, on a given Sunday. So I'm not talking about those, but the ones like us who are more extemporaneous, we have notes, we have a point, we know where we want to go, we know some of the things we want to say, but we speak off the cuff, so to speak. What you need to realize is actually happening right then, and you need to, for better or worse, weigh that in this way, is that what is actually happening is that the preacher is thinking out loud. Now, that's not necessarily a good thing. And this is one reason why in the last few years I've pulled away from what might be considered strict extemporaneous preaching. And I don't do that as much anymore. Now, I've tried writing out my sermon and reading it, and I only did it once, and so you can't judge anything by doing it once. You really would have to do it for 2 or 3 months, every single Sunday, every single time do it, in order to really know if you could do it and if it works for you or not. One time doesn't tell you anything. But I did it once and didn't like it too much. And it wasn't because I wasn't free to say what I wanted to say. I actually liked that part about it a lot. I liked that it constrained me and it kept me on path. The reason I didn't like it was because I had to take off the whole week of work. I didn't work that week, and all I did for about 50 hours was write that sermon, which is why if you ever hear about pastors who say they spend 40 hours or 50 hours or whatever writing or preparing their sermon, you think, how could they possibly spend that long preparing a sermon? Well, most likely they're actually writing the sermon out. And they actually have a manuscript. And many of them are even memorizing that sermon in order to appear to be preaching extemporaneously. Now, they're not trying to fool anybody. And I've heard some preachers criticize that type of preaching because they say, well, they're trying to fool people and make them think they can speak with that much ease. But they would readily tell you that they have a manuscript right there. They're not trying to hide that from anybody. But there's a problem with reading a sermon as opposed to memorizing it and speaking to you directly out. And that is eye contact. I always tell preachers, you have to maintain eye contact. Eye contact does more for you to maintain people's interest level than even being interesting, which is curious, because being interesting really has a large amount to do with your eye contact you have with people. So when you look people in the eye, it arrests them. It freezes them. It's hard to look away. I mean, just try it. Just go up to somebody, do it to somebody who you know won't punch you. But go up to somebody, a friend or somebody you know, and just look them right in the eye. Just right in the eye. Just look them in the eye. Don't blink. Don't look away. And don't say anything. And, people have different ways of reacting to that. If they're your friend and they think you're messing around with them, well, they're probably going to, look away or whatever, but they're just, you just have to keep looking back. It grabs you. You can't ignore somebody who's just staring at you. Now, when you preach, it's better not to stare, but you do want to make that eye contact. You want them to think that you're looking right into their eyes. And that's hard to do because we tend to focus on a couple people in the room. If you're speaking in the church and you don't feel confident, well, you're going to look at people who you feel are not threatening, possibly. Or you're going to be the other side of the spectrum, and you're going to look at the person who you think is most likely to criticize you, and you're going to look at them with a puppy eyes and hoping that they'll give you their approval so that you can feel confident. And you maybe if you're speaking and you're a little more confident what you're saying, you're going to tend to focus on people who are returning that eye contact. They're looking back at you. And so that, just like you're grabbing their attention, when they look back at you, they're grabbing your attention. And if you're not careful as a speaker, it becomes like a self-feeding loop. It's like feedback, right? You're looking at them, and because of that, they're looking at you, and because of that, you're looking at them. And so you end up just looking at 2 or 3 people the entire time, and the rest of the room becomes a blur because they're in your peripheral vision. Your vision, your mind, and your eye is only capable of really seeing a very small pinpoint. And so that pinpoint is constantly moving around, and you have your mind again tricks you into thinking that you have full perception of the room. You think I'm seeing everything, but you're never seeing everything. You're only seeing a very tiny thing. Your mind fills in all this blank, and it makes it you you think, well, sure, I see it with color and with detail, but you really don't. You don't see detail. You really don't see much color except what's in that tiny little hole that you're actually seeing through. And so you put 2 or 3 people inside that little target area, and that's the only people you're actually looking at. So you have to, as a speaker, you have to constantly be consciously. I've been doing this for like 20 some years, almost 30 years, and I still have to consciously tell myself in every sermon, make eye contact with everybody. Now, I don't always do it. I don't always succeed at that. But when I do, and if you notice and you say, oh, wow, that's interesting. He made eye contact with like the whole room. He constantly was scanning the room. That was not by accident, and it wasn't by training. It wasn't like it just came natural. I had to force myself, and I have to force myself every single time to do that. And that's what you need to do if you want to be a preacher or a speaker in the meeting or any public speaking. But if you want to speak in the meeting and you want to get people's interest, you need to learn to not look at your shoelaces, right? Not look up at the sky. No angels are coming down to help you. Don't look at people's belt buckle or at their chest or at their forehead, which is what people tend to do because it's more comfortable, because it's less intimidating. You need to look them right in the eye, every single person, and you need to do it without looking crazy. So don't give them the crazy eyes. Don't be all looking at them crazy eyes. That's not what No, that doesn't help. You need to have, and this is, this is difficult for me. This is where I've been trying to do. It's one reason I wear headphones when I'm doing these podcasts. And if I could get away with it, I'd wear them when I'm preaching because it helps me modulate my voice. You want to be calm. And I know I'm not I'm not the patron saint of calmness and of easygoingness. So, don't think I believe my own propaganda. But you do want to be calm. And you want to have eyes that match the tenor of the message. So there's some times where you need to have the excited eyes. There's sometimes you need to have the laid back, take it easy eyes. Everything's going to be okay. We're having a good time eyes. And I'm not good at all this, but I've seen speakers who are, and if you can just put your emotion into your eyes, the way we are pretty good at doing it with our voice, and look at people and maintain that eye contact and scan the room, looking at people in their eyes, it'll go so far to keeping people's interest. You can take a boring sermon or an almost boring, maybe boring is going a little too far, but an almost boring sermon, and you can make it very compelling just because you preach with your eyes to their eyes. So keep your eyes open and keep eye contact with the room. And when you do that, what you need to understand, going back to my point, and you probably thought I forgot my point because you probably forgot my point. But my point is there's 2 real ways that I know of thinking, and that is speaking to people or writing. And so my point with the preaching was that when, you hear a preacher say something, don't take them too much to task when they say something wrong. Point it out. Right? When I say something wrong, don't say, well, he was probably thinking out loud, so, don't just let it go. No. Point it out to me. If I say something stupid, don't let me go on without telling me. That's like if you see somebody with their zipper down and you don't tell them because you don't want to embarrass them. So you let them walk around like that all day long. Well, thanks for nothing. No, point it out. Say, hey, your fly's down, right? So if a preacher says something stupid, go up to him and say, look, I love you and I love your preaching, but what you said today wasn't great. And if it's me, just tell me, hey, it's real stupid. What you said, that I thought that was kind of stupid. And I know it's awkward, and not all preachers appreciate it. Trust me. I've tried to give some constructive criticism to preacher friends of mine, and generally not accepted well. There's some that do, and I really appreciate that. My co-elder, Mike Pemberton, is great at taking constructive criticism. I mean, he really is good at it. He's taught me a lot about that. And so if he says something stupid, you should tell him. Don't talk about him behind his back. He doesn't want that. If he says something that hurts your feelings, or you disagree with, or you think is off topic, or you don't like the way he thought he could have presented it better, I'm telling you, trust me on this. He'll probably pull a gun on you now that I'm saying this and prove me wrong. But until that happens and somebody gets a bullet in them, take my word for this. He wants you to talk to him. And if you have a hard time talking to him face to face, send him a text, send him an email, get on Slack and send him a message on Slack, a private message, and say, Brother Mike, I love you, but what you said, I really didn't agree with it, or whatever. I just thought, I don't like the way you explained it. I thought you could have done better. I didn't think the sermon was whatever it is. Whatever it is that you think you want to say, you should tell him, because he is a person who really knows how to take criticism. And I've been trying to learn from him on that. And so I would hope if I preach a message you don't like, reach out to me. Tell me that. Don't let me continue on thinking it was good. Now, I'll let you in on a secret. Neither Mike Pemberton nor myself often think that our sermons are that good. So you may think that we're sitting at home, patting ourselves on the back, giving ourselves a thumbs up and liking our own message on YouTube. Trust me, that is far from the case, far from the case. So what will you hear when you hear me, or pretty much any other extemporaneous preacher, say something that might be a little stupid? You shouldn't throw out the entire sermon or throw out the entire ministry because of that. Because you need to understand, it's not like that's something we probably wrote down and wrote out a long, very, very compelling argument for, and then we're getting up and we're giving you like a final product. Oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, what you're hearing is us thinking out loud. I say us, meaning pretty much any preacher who speaks extemporaneously. We are thinking out loud. And whenever you think, you're going to get some things wrong. And that's what many times preaching is. And maybe it shouldn't be that, but, I haven't found a way to successfully change that, not in myself, and certainly not in the greater evangelical world. And so that's probably going to be the way preaching will be for a very long time, possibly forever, will be that it is thinking out loud. And so you have to make some allowances for that. Just like we make allowances for you when you think out loud in the open meeting. Trust me, we make a lot of allowances. I, for the most part, will never correct anybody in the open meeting. You would have to get up and say something completely blasphemous to get me to get up and try to correct it. And even then, I'd have to think that you knew better before you did it. I really would. I mean, somebody got up who I thought probably doesn't know better, and they say that Jesus isn't God. I probably would not get up and try to correct that. One reason is because I've come to the conclusion that for the most part, nobody's listening to you. Just nobody's listening. And so if I get up, if I get up and correct something that you said that was really wrong, let's say it was really wrong, that was probably the first anybody heard of it, because they probably were not even listening to you when you said it. And so for me to get up and correct it seems to actually be causing more problem than I'm solving. And so the way I would typically handle that is I would just go to you in private and say, hey, I don't know if you meant to say this. Maybe you were confused. Maybe you were thinking out loud. Maybe you got a little turned around. Maybe you think this is right, but you haven't had a chance to really put it up against other ideas and have it challenged. So I just want to tell you what you said, that wasn't right. It wasn't accurate. No, you're mistaken. And we would have that conversation. And that's how I would prefer to handle that type of a thing. It would have to be somebody that I've already spoken to in private. They know that is not something the elders agree with, and it has to be a point that's really matters. And then maybe I would stand up and correct it, but hardly ever. And so if you're not getting up in the open meeting because you think that me or Brother Mike Pemberton is going to get up and they're going to smack you over the head if you say anything wrong or anything that we disagree with, no, do not have that fear in you. Speak up. Speak up. I'm okay with you saying things I don't agree with. I'm okay with that. I don't think that everything that's said in the church has to be things I agree with. In fact, that would be such a boring church. That would be an echo chamber of the blandest sort. So by all means, speak your mind. Now, if you and I have had a discussion on the matter, and you know where I stand, and you get up and you speak and say something that you know I don't agree with, I might get up then and say, brother, I appreciate what you said. Or sister, I appreciate what you just said, but I don't agree with that. And we've talked about it. I don't agree with it. I'm not mad at you. I'm not rebuking you for saying what you're saying, but I'm going to present a different viewpoint. Now, I don't generally do that when it's somebody who's just trying to share. They're just trying to, I hate that word share, but they're just trying to preach. They're just trying to teach something. They're trying to participate. They're trying to contribute in some way in the meeting. And so, no, even if they say something I don't agree with, I don't get up and correct it or change it or say I see it differently. I just let it be, and so should you. I mean, we don't have to correct everything. Everything doesn't have to be perfect in the meeting. This is one of the things that I think is holding people back. If I only preached messages when I thought I'd gotten them perfect, well, I would preach like once every 3 months or less. And so we can't make the meeting be something where everyone thinks it has to be perfect. Just get up and speak. Just get up and say what it is you've been thinking, what it is you've been contemplating from the scriptures and from the Spirit of God. Just get up and speak it. And if you're way off base, well, then I'll probably come up in a very private opportunity. I'm not trying to embarrass you. I'm not trying to whack you down, but I'll come up and I'll say, hey, I have some disagreements with what you said. I'd like to show you why I think you're a little off base there. And we'll have a conversation. And I'm not expecting you then to get up and do a mea culpa and beat yourself up in front of everybody and say how you were off base or correct the record. We need to get over our big bad selves. Trust me. You tell me, what was the last thing that was said in the open meeting at the YMCA, those of you that are in Freeborn Church? What was preached in the open meeting? Does anybody remember? Now, some of you might, and if you do, kudos to you. I don't have a clue. I can't even remember without going back through my notes what I preached in the last meeting. So, it isn't the end of the world for someone to say something that we might disagree with. It is the end of the open meeting if nobody gets up and says anything. That is the end of the meeting. So, don't be afraid to get up and speak. Don't be afraid to contribute. Nobody at Freeborn is going to slap you down. In fact, the one thing you might see me, you will see me get up and flex, if you will, is if there's somebody who gets overzealous and starts slapping people down in the meeting. That I will call down. That we can't have. We have to realize that if we're going to get up and minister to each other, then we're more like doctors than we are anything else. And that what we're really doing in the open meeting is we're practicing. We're practicing church. We're not getting it right. We're not getting it right. And so don't be afraid to practice. I do every Sunday. Every Sunday, I practice to preach. I practice to teach. I practice to encourage. And oftentimes, I'm horrible at it. Just horrible at it. I know it. You know it. Everybody knows it. And that's why I'm so thankful to all of you at Freeborn Church who allow me to continue practicing. And I know that I have said things that have offended some of you, that have hurt some of your feelings, and have made some of you downright mad, angry to your core. And I appreciate you for that. I love each and every one of you for that, because you continue to tolerate my imperfection. And I want to tolerate yours. But you got to get up in order to afford me the privilege of doing so. You have to get up. You have to speak. Now, I know that right now that's hard to do. We're not able to meet together. And frankly, I'm not interested in doing some type of, 10 feet apart and bandanas over our faces, even though I don't think the YMCA would even allow us to meet there even under that condition. But I'm not sure I'm really interested in doing that. And I'm not interested in doing a drive-in church, or I don't know what other kind of ways people are trying to find around this. I'm just not interested in trying to fabricate the experience that church has been for all of us up until now. I think that times have changed. I hope it's temporary, but I suspect it's for quite a bit longer than we expect. And I don't know what to do about that. I don't know that this live streaming of the service is the right way to go about it. But I don't think that fabricating a church out in the parking lot is either. So I don't know. I don't know what might be the best way to go about this. I do think this. I think that we need to find a way as a church to minister to each other the way we do in an open meeting. Maybe we need to use technology to do that. Maybe we need to do a Zoom meeting where you see everybody's pretty little face on the screen and everyone can talk in it and say something. Maybe we need to do that. Maybe we need to do an open Zoom meeting so everyone can have a part. That might not be a bad idea. In fact, you know what? When you hear this or you see this video, I know many of you right now are busy binging on Netflix, and so you don't have time to watch me. I understand. I'm going to be binging a little. Actually, I'm not, but I understand. But when you hear this, when you see this later, put some thought into it. Maybe we should do an open Zoom meeting. Or maybe we need to find some other way. Meeting together every Sunday, we did that because it was the easiest, most efficient, most economical way to do what Christians are supposed to be doing. We often think that what Christians are supposed to be doing is going to church, to the building. And so we're trying to replicate that now. We're trying to get that back. Because we think, well, if we're not going to the church building, well, then we're not doing what Christians should be doing. But I don't think that is accurate. There's too many scenarios that could be imagined where that simply would not be possible. And then what? Well, I think we're there now. And right now, getting together in a building is not feasible. Not for us anyways. Now, if we had a building, I would be very tempted to be one of those preachers who are going to say, I don't care what the government says. I'm going to hold meetings for anyone who wants to come. Now, that's a bit at odds with my opinion politically, because I don't think church buildings and church meetings are essential. I know that runs contrary to what all Christians are saying on Facebook, but I simply don't think they're essential at all. There's too many other ways Christianity can be done. We do not need a building. We don't have to all go get together in one spot to do it. but we do have to minister to each other. And I don't think we've been doing a very good job at that because, well, I'm not trying to blame anybody, and I'm certainly not going to fall on my sword on this right now. But it's because we thought, well, this is temporary and we can ride this out. And, why are we going to go and put a lot of effort and investment into disrupting everything if we're going to be back in the YMCA within 3 or 4 weeks? So it's like, well, let's just ride it out. It's not a big deal. But, I'm not sure that this is going to be over anytime soon. And it could come back. We could have a relapse in this whole disease. And it could be back again with even more vigor very soon. So, we probably need to put some thought into this and how we're going to handle this as a church and how we're going to minister to each other. I think the mistake is trying to think about it as in, how are we going to replicate going to church together on Sunday without doing that? And I think that's a mistake. I think we need to be asking ourselves, how do we minister to each other? Because that's what we need. That's the point of going to church. Look, I can preach a sermon to the camera, and I don't see any difference really. There really isn't any difference that I can tell. That's why, we can get together and preach a sermon, and you can watch it on your TV at whenever time suits you the best. It doesn't have to be Sunday morning. It can be Sunday night, or you can listen to it whenever you want. And that's fine. I know there's a slight advantage to having a actual physical presence and doing a live show, so to speak. And there's an advantage to that. It's true, but it's negligible in reality, especially given the quality of the majority of sermons in that live show. It really is a negligible advantage. So what is it that we're actually missing? Well, what we're missing, even if we don't miss it, even if we don't realize we're missing it, and even if we don't have the feeling of missing it, but what we are in reality missing is the ministry one to another. And how do you do that in a time with no building, no set time when we all get together and are able to do that, and unable even to go to each other's homes to do it, perhaps? Which is kind of where we're at now. Might be where we're at in a few months if this comes back even worse than the first time, the way some people are predicting. How do Christians minister to each other? That's the question we have to ask, and we have to answer it, because that is the requirement of the church. The church has no biblical requirement to get together in a building. None. The verse in Hebrews 10, not forsaking the assembling of yourselves together, completely out of context. We have no requirement as a church to get together once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, 5 times a week. None. There's other ways that the church can function. But how do we function in these times? That's what we need to ask, and we really need to solve it. I don't think we can let much more time go by without solving that problem. And like I said earlier, I right now don't have an answer. I'm thinking through this problem as I'm speaking to you. That's why I like doing these videos. It gives me a chance to think. And I hope you have had a chance to think. Well, I had some other things that I wanted to get into and talk about, more secular, political, news type stuff, but I think I'll leave it there. If any of you have any ideas or suggestions on this, I really hope you'll reach out to me. You can email me at podcast@freebornchurch.com, podcast@freebornchurch.com. If you have any ideas, I hope you'll email me those. Saturday at 9 a.m., we'll be live with Adam Newman. I'm really looking forward to that conversation. I hope you are too. We're probably going to talk a lot about finances and economics. Adam is pretty good with those things and has been thinking about them for a long time, and so that's a topic that he and I like to talk about. So we're going to have a conversation about that and some other things as well, things he's doing and how, over there at the church where he's a minister at Freedom Church for All, I think it's called. Freedom, a Church for All, or Church for Everybody. Anyways, he's over at Freedom. And so we're going to have some conversation about all that. So I'm looking forward to that on Saturday. And we have guests lined up to be here every Saturday for quite a while now. And I'm still trying to reach out and find other people who can be interesting to talk to. So I'm inviting people to come on Saturdays for your listening pleasure. I do it all for you. Anyways, so I'll leave it there. Reach out to me at podcast@freebornchurch.com if you want to hear more about this. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can also listen to it on audio. I upload the audio of the Saturday podcast as well as these midweek podcasts I do on iTunes and Spotify. I know it's on those two. If you have some other place where you normally listen to podcasts and we're not there, let me know and I will try to get it listed on those directories as well. But you can find us for sure on iTunes and on Spotify. If you just search for Freeborn Podcast or Freeborn Church, you will find the channel and I upload the audio. And if you don't listen to it on audio, and don't know what the advantage might be on that. Well, the advantage is it consumes very little resources, so very little data, even though that's really not an issue anymore for most people, but also very little battery on your phone. So you don't have to pay a subscription to YouTube to be able to turn off the screen and listen to the audio of the video, right? The way some people do. You don't have to do that. You can just go to the podcast and through your podcast app, if you have an iPhone, or I'm sure there's some similar one on Android. I don't know much about Android, but you can go to that and it'll download the episodes automatically for you. And then whenever you're driving or whenever you're mowing the lawn or whatever it is you would like to listen to this, you can just listen to it like an audio file, and it consumes very few resources of your data, of your phone battery and things like that. And so it's a great way to do it. It's actually the way most people listen to these type of things. Now, most of our listeners are on YouTube, but you should check out the podcast. And anyways, subscribe to both of them. And if you want to help the podcast get into more hands, you can write a review for it. You can subscribe to it on YouTube and on the podcast apps, the channels that are out there, and share it with a friend. If I've said anything at all that you find interesting, compelling, important, valuable, tell a friend. Tell a friend, hey, the pastor of our church does a podcast. You should check it out. And recommend one that you think is up their alley. Maybe they'll get hooked. Anyways. All right. Well, thanks for being with us. This is the Freeborn Podcast. I'm Mike Jackson, in case you didn't know. And I will try to be doing this more often during the week. But like I say, there's no Corona time for me. God bless you.